American President Donald Trump today admitted what he actually talked about with Vladimir Zelensky in the Vatican. Based on his recent statements, Trump now appears more satisfied with Volodymyr Zelensky and completely disappointed with Vladimir Putin. And what's interesting is that in a short interview, Trump mentioned this twice, that he is disappointed with Putin and is still not sure if he really wants to end the war. In this episode, we will discuss Donald Trump's main statements. There we'll talk about Crimea, about what Trump wants from the dictator Putin, and of course about Donald Trump's new attitude toward Volodymyr Zelensky. But what's interesting after this interview? After Donald Trump's statements that if a ceasefire agreement is not reached within the next 2 weeks, then he will come out and reveal his true attitude toward the dictator Putin and announce what he will do next. Interestingly, Trump claims that now there are no more games. Supposedly, now everything is serious. But at the same time, Sergei Lavrov, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, comes out and puts forward his demands to Ukraine in order to even begin the peace process and peace negotiations. And there, the demands already concern Crimea, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, weapons for Ukraine, joining NATO, and a whole bunch of other different demands. But interestingly, the Kremlin simultaneously declares that they are still ready for negotiations. And my feeling is that Putin's team has simply figured out what to pressure Donald Trump on to make him more loyal to them. It's just saying that we're ready for anything, but here's a list of our demands. Interestingly, the day before, Marco Rubio, who is the Secretary of State of the United States of America, explained why the United States is not imposing additional sanctions against Russia. He says, "We didn't impose them because we were really hoping that Russia would still agree to a reasonable dialogue." Well, after that, Vladimir Zelensky announced that Russia had resumed assault activity on the front and is simply trying to deceive the whole world. Well, first of all, of course, Donald Trump. I'm Alexei Pechi. It's April 28th. Let's review everything sequentially. So, American President Donald Trump gave his first detailed comment after meeting with Zelensky in Rome. The text features a series of valuable insights, but most significantly, it showcases a distinct change in rhetoric. First, I'll share some conclusions that can be drawn from Donald Trump's statements, and then I'll quote the full answers. Now, I'll quote for you in full everything that Donald Trump said today. But if we make a brief summary at first from his speech, then according to Donald Trump, the meeting with Zelensky was good, wonderful, and beautiful. That's literally what he said. Trump is very disappointed with Putin. In fact, during the short interview, he repeated this twice. Zelensky, as Trump says, is doing a good job. Let me remind you that just literally 2 weeks ago, according to Trump, Zelensky was doing a bad job and was heading in the wrong direction. Zelensky said that he needs more weapons, but he's been saying that for 3 years. Let's see what Russia will do. Well, as they say, Trump, of course, could have not mentioned this at all, but I think this is a hint to the dictator Putin that the option of supplying weapons is still on the table. And here we have an interesting point. I'll make a small lyrical digression. Because recently Denis Shmyhal, who is the Prime Minister of Ukraine, announced that negotiations are underway with the United States of America regarding an agreement on rare earth metals. A very important point was reached, which is that all those debts, as Donald Trump calls them, of Ukraine to the United States of America will not be taken into account in this agreement. That is, in this agreement, any payment of aid from the United States to Ukraine will be counted from the moment this agreement is signed. Everything that happened before is completely excluded. And this is an important point. That is, if we come to the conclusion that the Americans agree that all the aid provided before the signing of the agreement is excluded, then why include a clause in the agreement stating that any subsequent aid must be paid for? Therefore, I do not rule out that this option of arms supplies from the United States of America remains on the table. Then Trump says, if you want Crimea, go to Obama and Biden. Basically, he has repeated this several times already. Then Trump declares that he wouldn't want to do anything against Russia, but we have a lot of strong sides and we are respected. Egg prices are falling. Then Trump declares that there is a deadline in about 2 weeks, maybe less or maybe more. Again, we have some kind of deadline, after which Trump will come out and announce his true attitude toward Putin. Then Trump declares that his relationship with Zelensky has never been bad. In the Oval Office, as he says, there was a small dispute. He says there was a slight misunderstanding, but overall, he's never had a bad relationship with Zelensky. Then Trump says, Russian troops are not too outstanding, but there are a lot more of them. And this is interesting because for the first time, Trump gives an assessment of the armed forces of the Russian Federation when he says that they are not too outstanding. In this, again, you can consider it a certain hint. Trump then mentions that Zelensky has become calmer and fully grasped the situation. And let's see what happens, repeats Donald Trump 4 times. Well, now I'll translate the full quotes for you. Here is the complete dialogue between the journalist and Donald Trump. Here will be first the journalist's question, then Trump's answer. The journalist asks how the meeting went, what your message to Putin was after meeting with Zelensky. What is it, Trump? The meeting went well. We'll see what happens in the next few days. I was very disappointed that Russian missiles were flying. There is a tough road ahead. We had a good meeting. It was a wonderful meeting. It was a beautiful meeting, I'll tell you. This is the most beautiful office, I mean St. Peter's Basilica, where they met, that I have ever seen. A beautiful scene. Zelensky was very, he wants to do something good for his country. I think he's doing a good job and working very hard. The journalist asks, and what did Zelensky say to you, Trump? He said that he needs more weapons. He's been saying that for 3 years now. He needs more weapons. And we'll see what happens. I want to see what happens regarding Russia, because Russia. I was surprised and disappointed, very disappointed, that they bombed those places after we had discussed everything. Journalist, will you talk to Putin again? Trump? Yes. The journalist also asks if Zelensky talked about Crimea. Trump confirms that Russia invaded Ukraine briefly. He states that Crimea was given away by Obama and Biden around 11-12 years ago. I don't know how you can bring up the issue of Crimea when it happened so long ago. No one brought up this issue for 12 years, and now they're bringing it up. I told them, you should go to Obama. Ask him why they gave it away. They gave it away without a single shot being fired. The journalist asks, is Zelensky ready to give up Crimea? Trump responds that he believes this is Biden's war. When asked what he wants Putin to do, Trump replies, I want him to stop shooting. Sit down at the negotiating table and make a deal. I believe we have a deal outline. I want to make it and end this so I can return to normal life. What actions are you planning to take against Russia? Trump, I can do a lot of things. I wouldn't want to do that, but we have a lot of strong options. We have built the United States. I think we are now more respected as a country than ever before. Food and egg prices are decreasing. No more games. Though the purpose of the addition is unclear, it seems to be Trump's evaluation of how much the United States has improved. Next, Trump is asked, do you trust Putin? Trump replies, I'll let you know in 2 weeks. That is, in 2 weeks he will answer whether he trusts Putin. The journalist asks, can you be more specific, Trump? 2 weeks or less, or maybe a little more? They are losing many people, with 3,000 to 4,000 dying every week. These losses are very heavy. What is your relationship with Zelensky now? Is it better than after the Oval Office? They were never bad, answers Donald Trump. We had a small dispute because I didn't agree with some things he said. And all of this was on camera, but that's okay for me. But we had a dispute. But look, he's in a tough situation, a very tough situation. He's fighting against a much larger army, a much larger one. And these Russian troops weren't particularly outstanding. It turned out to be much more difficult than the Russians thought. But what helped the Ukrainians was that we gave them assistance worth $350 billion. Actually, let me remind you, it was about $100 billion. Next, Trump asks, do you see a different attitude from Zelensky? Trump answers, yes. I see that he has become calmer. I think he understands the situation and I think he wants to make a deal. I don't know if he will make a deal, but I think he wants to. So, as you can see, Donald Trump's rhetoric is changing a little, and that's a good sign because he's starting to doubt Russia's sincerity, Putin's sincerity, and he's saying that, well, apparently we'll try again. And now everything depends on the Russians. In these answers, it was repeatedly stated that everything is supposedly clear with Zelensky and Ukraine. It's clear what they want, what they're striving for, what they're working on, what their demands are, and so on. But as for Russia, he says, I have questions, I'm angry, I'm disappointed in them, let's see how they will act. He says he has some aces up his sleeve that he could play, but won't for now as negotiations continue. About this, let me remind you that recently Marco Rubio, a kind of Secretary of the United States of America, and he stated that Washington wants to understand how interested Ukraine and Russia are in peace. And that's why the Americans did not impose additional sanctions against the Russian Federation. Quote, "We hope that these efforts will work at the diplomatic level. We hope that we can bring these two sides closer to each other. As soon as you start doing such things, meaning imposing sanctions, you are actually abandoning this attempt. You are dooming yourself to another 2 years of war, and we don't want to allow that." According to Marco Rubio, the United States is the only country that communicates with both Kyiv and Moscow. And no one else in the world, except President Donald Trump, can succeed in this matter. This is a serious and important responsibility and opportunity. And we want to be sure that we see everything through to the end, that we don't give up on something that could really work and lead to peace. But we don't want to keep wasting time on something that won't bring results. Mark Rubio said that during the peace process, the United States has been evaluating if Ukraine and Russia genuinely desire to attain peace. He says Washington must know how close the sides are after 90 days of work and efforts. Quote, "That's exactly what we're trying to understand this week. There are reasons for optimism, but there are also grounds for concern. Everything is very complicated. If ending this war were easy, it would have been done long ago. But at the moment, the only person who can unite these two sides and put an end to the war is President Donald Trump. But immediately after that, Russian officials make it clear that they are not really all that agreeable to Donald Trump's terms. They say, of course, we are ready for negotiations, but here is our list of demands for Ukraine." Kremlin Press Secretary Peskov said today that they are prepared for negotiations. They are waiting for Kiev to, in fact, ask the Kremlin, let's sit down at the negotiating table. After that, the Russian Foreign Ministry published an interview with Lavrov in one of the Brazilian newspapers. From this interview, you can highlight the list of conditions that the Kremlin is putting forward in order to sit down at the negotiating table with Ukraine. And next, I will simply give you a few points that Lavrov voiced. Requirements for Ukraine. First, Kyiv must not join NATO and must confirm its neutral and non-aligned status. Second, overcoming the consequences of the government that was formed as a result of the coup in February. 2014, the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv, including its actions aimed at the legislative and physical eradication of everything Russian, language, media, culture, traditions, and canonical orthodoxy. These are quotes from Lavrov. This is the third one. The imperative is international recognition of the Russian status of Crimea, Sevastopol, the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, Luhansk People's Republic, Kherson region, and Zaporizhzhia. All of Kyiv's obligations must be legally enshrined, have enforcement mechanisms, and be of a permanent nature. On the agenda are the tasks of demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, lifting of sanctions, cancellation of lawsuits and arrest warrants, and the return of all frozen Russian assets in the West. We will also seek reliable security guarantees for the Russian Federation against threats created by the hostile activities of NATO, the European Union, and their individual member states on our western borders. As you understand, there is absolutely no progress to be seen. That is, Lavrov is voicing exactly all the same demands that the Kremlin put forward probably at the very beginning of the full-scale war. The situation remains unchanged. NATO accession and the transfer of 4 regions and Crimea to the Russian Federation, including unoccupied territories, are still unresolved issues. Denazification, demilitarization, security guarantees for Russia, because it turns out that NATO still threatens the Russian Federation, and so on and so on. Plus, as he says, something needs to be done about the extermination of everything Russian in Ukraine. Language, media, culture, traditions, canonical orthodoxy. Well, plus, something needs to be done, as he says, about the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv. That is, once again, there is no progress at all. I have a question. What did 90 days of Steve Witkoff's efforts during meetings with the dictator Putin amount to? It's absolutely unclear. Nothing has changed. That's why here, as they say, Donald Trump's statements come into play. If Trump is already saying that it's clear what Ukraine wants, now the questions are for Russia. Russia is clearly expressing that they don't care about any peace efforts. That's it. They absolutely don't care. Witkov came to us, Dmitriev flew to Washington. Are you trying to stop the war there or something? Lavrov recently stated that no one will surrender the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, asserting it is in safe hands. Therefore, of course, we will not return it to Ukraine. But in fact, these statements by Lavrov completely nullify all of Donald Trump's peace efforts. There you go, they are absolutely nullified. And when Rubio says we didn't impose sanctions to find out whether Russia is ready for peace, no, it's not ready. Russia, through the words of Lavrov, presented exactly the same list of demands to Ukraine that was voiced at the very beginning of the full-scale phase of the war. Well, and here it is after all of this. Zelensky stated that the meetings in the Vatican and Rome on April 26 confirmed that Ukraine's partners understand what is really happening. As Zelensky stated, after Easter, Russian troops resumed their usual assault activity. Russia is trying to deceive the world and prolong the war. Zelensky said the Vatican and Rome meetings affirmed that Ukraine's partners grasp the situation. Next is a quote. "We are keeping our position strong so that we have every opportunity for proper diplomacy. Russians talk a lot about their supposed willingness to accept American proposals, but so far there are no signs that the Russian army is preparing for a real ceasefire." Zelensky noted that the Russians are trying to advance despite heavy losses. Quote, "Every day of such battles on the front line proves absolutely clearly that Russia is really trying to deceive the world, to deceive America and others, and to further prolong this war. Without putting pressure on Russia, it is impossible for the Russians to take all the steps, to do everything necessary to stop the war." Well, today I really like the statement of one of the American senators who, said it directly. John Kennedy, a Republican senator, who today stated directly, quote, "I don't think things will get better until we make it clear to Putin that we are ready to turn him and his country into fish food." Further, of course, Kennedy clarifies that he is not talking about nuclear war, but about tough economic measures. According to him, Putin deceives Donald Trump at every step, has broken all his promises, and has shown blatant disrespect for the American president. Next is the quote, "I think Putin believes that America has taken a high-speed train to the city of fools. He thinks that we are afraid of him, and he will continue to behave this way until he realizes that he will have to pay a very high price for his actions." Well, and then what? Senator Kennedy suggested putting more pressure on the Russian economy, primarily by completely cutting off the sale of Russian oil. Now that's constructive. That's a pretty clear position. I would like all these words to be spoken now by Donald Trump. And then it will become clear that Trump really understands that Putin is deceiving him, tricking him, and considers him an absolute weakling. Because look, 90 days of attempts to somehow resolve this war. After these 90 days, Lavrov comes out and says exactly what was said at the beginning of the full-scale war. That is, none of Trump's efforts or his team's efforts helped. That's all for now, friends. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like this video. I'm announcing the next episode right away. In the next episode, we will discuss Plan B, which Ukraine and its European partners have already prepared. In case Trump, just walks out of these negotiations and doesn't want to admit that Putin deceived him. There is some interesting information there, and the Europeans have taken a fairly firm position, which will work in Ukraine's favor. More on this next time, folks. If you want to support the work of this channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. Or you can become a sponsor of this channel on the platform by clicking the sponsor button under this video, or use the quick response code on your screens. This platform is the easiest and most convenient way to support the work of this channel. That's all. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.